sharing? Yeah, there it is. Okay, so thanks again, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Paulina, for having me here today. And today I'm going to chat to you about the right elements for your website pages to double conversions and also SEO traffic. And so let's kind of start off with a little bit about me. I'm Sophia Dagnon. I'm the head of research and copy at Getuplift. My team works with brands like Bitly, Teamwork, Strata, Nextbase, Thinkific, just basically a lot of growth-focused brand to help them strategically increase conversions. And so I'm going to show you some of what we do today, and hopefully it's going to be practical and fun. Okay, so to kick us off, let's start with the elephant in the room, which is this wonderful graph. So there's this kind of misconception, and I apologize, during this webinar, you will see my cat trying to hang out with me because I'm speaking, and that just happens every time. But back to the graph. So there's this misconception that especially in B2B, the way people make decisions, especially the way leadership and anybody kind of in a decision-making role makes a decision, is through this very data-driven approach. And the data-driven stuff does happen. But the reality is kind of a lot closer to this. Basically, people, all of us, decision makers, people in B2B, in B2C, in any role doing anything in life, kind of make decisions because we like things. It's a lot more emotional than we like to see. Like a lot of the time, like let's say you want to buy new glasses or something on Amazon. You're going to look through the reviews, you're going to do the research, say, oh, are they polarized? Are they cool? Do I like them? Who made them? Are they well made? And all of this data does affect decision, but so much of it kind of just backs up your initial feeling of, hey, do I actually like the way they look on me? Do I feel that I will feel good wearing these glasses? And so we kind of buy our products because we like them. Okay, so in other words, all of these things you're seeing on the table, features, pricing, automation, technology, shipping, AI, especially AI right now, it does matter to conversions. It absolutely does. But it only matters in its relationship to your customer's emotional needs. So we need to have both that very kind of data-driven part and, sorry, Rocket, and also how it impacts the emotions, really, our feelings. And so all of this is based on some research that Professor Antonio Damasio did. He was a professor of psychology and neuroscience, and what he did is essentially he studied what happens when people with a specific type of brain damage, who basically, like, that particular type of brain damage stops your decision-making center. So what happens to you if you, and you know what, I actually skipped ahead there. What his research actually did was study people with a particular kind of brain damage that stopped your emotions. And so, as I kind of spoiled ahead of that, when you can't feel emotions, you can't really make decisions. So one of the things that was really interesting that came out of this research is that people whose emotional center was damaged couldn't even figure out what they wanted for lunch. Like, they struggle with decisions about what kind of sandwich they wanted, or whether they want a cup of tea in the morning or a cup of coffee. Because what he found is that when that emotional center is damaged, you kind of have to go through all the data for every single decision. So imagine, you're deciding whether you want to put milk in your coffee. You'd have to go through every single point every time you decide to have a cup of coffee, which frankly takes too long and would make life incredibly, incredibly challenging to live. And this is why we have these emotional shortcuts. We've kind of built our understanding of what we like and what we don't like, and we use those shortcuts to make decisions in every aspect of our lives. So ultimately, emotions affect those decisions. And then those decisions, of course, affect your website conversions. And finally, that affects revenue. It affects how much people buy from you. So to double conversions, you need to really understand how your customers feel. And that is especially true in B2B, because basically the more complex a decision somebody needs to make, let's say the difference between kind of buying that pair of sunglasses from earlier versus buying software that your whole team is going to use. The more complex a decision is, the more emotional weight there is. Because let's take that example of, let's say you're choosing to switch your project management software, right? And you're the decision maker. You're the person who's in charge with ultimately saying, yep, I think we should switch from ClickUp to Monday, for example. So it's not just you that's affected by that decision. You have to think about things like adoption. Will your team like it? Will your boss like it? How will everybody feel about that? Will the switch be super painful? Because switching software, as I think all of you know, basically if you've switched software, any kind of software, it is one of the most time-consuming, painful experiences there is. No matter how smooth you try to make it, something always goes wrong. And so when we're making these decisions in B2B, you're carrying that emotional weight of like, will this decision actually help me? Would it help my team? Would it help people like me? Would it help me do my job? And that's why emotions in that particular space are so important. And so here is an example from a client we worked with of what happens when you skip kind of the feeling stage of figuring out what your customers are really feeling. So this is a fantastic product called Upright, which essentially, much like the name says, helps you improve your posture. It helps you stay straighter. And what we're looking at right now was the homepage they had, I think about 2-3 years ago. Just, nice, clear, get the healthy. Actually, no, this is not what we're looking at right now. We're looking at the page that we helped them write, get the healthy posture you've always wanted. But kind of going back again, I seem to be jumping in time for this presentation. I apologize. I've left my time machine at home. Okay, but basically, the team was struggling to figure out how to increase conversions, right? As we all do, you're looking at your webpage and you're thinking, man, this should be converting better. We have such a great team. We're putting so much work in, and yet we're just kind of plateauing. And we don't know why, because everybody is super talented and great, and the product is great. So, what do you do? So they did all the really smart technical things that you do when something isn't working. So they tested reducing load time, which is great. I mean, you can't go wrong with reducing loading time. They tested adding an exit pop-up, changing the color of the CTA, removing steps in the funnel, changing the homepage headline. All pretty smart, sensible elements to test. And yet, even though they tested all of these things, conversions just stayed kind of flat. They didn't go down, but they didn't do anything interesting either. So why did that happen? The challenge with just testing elements, right, is that there's actually nothing specifically wrong with the elements. It's just, it all kind of vaguely feels the same to customers because unlike us, they don't spend that much time just obsessing over every single element. They look at the site in a very holistic kind of half-tired way of, does this thing vaguely help me? And do I have the energy to actually decide if I care enough to read this right now? Or do I have other stuff I need to be doing? So unless we properly kind of emotion sucker punch them in the gut, they're mostly going to ignore the small changes just because they don't register that much. That's why testing elements doesn't really work. What does work is testing customer-driven strategy. And so let's dig into what I actually mean by that. So what I'm going to go through now are the 3 steps that we use to help our customers increase conversions. And we'll also kind of touch on how that affects SEO traffic and all of your SEO efforts too. So step 1, which is probably absolutely to no surprise of anyone here, is research. So what you really need to know about your prospects to create a high converting website comes to a couple of points. So we need to understand the pain that people feel when they start searching for a solution like yours. And at that point, I'm not going to dig into stages of awareness too much, which is basically where your customer is in terms of how much they know about your product. But whenever you're making any kind of buying decision, usually start because something isn't working. There's some kind of trigger that's been building in the background that gets so frustrating that you just feel you have no other option but to solve this pain and to find something that makes this situation, this kind of untenable situation you've now found yourself in, kind of okay to live in again. And so if we don't understand that pain, we can't really solve it, and then we can't really sell our product in the best way possible. That's why we always start with kind of figuring out, okay, Where's the prospect feeling stuck? What is making them feel really angry and frustrated? And how are we helping? Then the second thing is we need to understand the emotional triggers driving decision making. And that tends to vary quite a lot, especially between B2B and B2C. Because in B2B, right, a lot of the emotional triggers are linked to you. It's linked to the person making the decision and how it affects their professional development and their career. Because whether you're bringing in a new tool, whether you're hiring a consultant, whether you're switching from a solution that somebody on the team used to really love, and yet now the rest of the team feels doesn't work, all of these things affect how they're going to approach this buying decision and how they're even going to feel when they interact with you and when they interact with your tool. So understanding kind of just that, the political individual landscape of the person, basically all the things they're having to fight with in order to move that decision forward is really, really important. Then we have the hesitations and concerns that are keeping them from choosing you or anyone else. And that is just figuring out all those fears kind of sitting at the back of the head. Like, if I switch to this tool, will it break? Will customer support be awful? Will my manager think I'm an idiot? They're kind of almost going through the worst case scenarios always. And so when we understand those, we can meet them and be like, hey, no, actually, our customer support is great. And here's a few customer stories from people that are in the same position as you who kind of say that. And here's what they loved about us. So understand their hesitations and concerns helps us meet them. And then finally, we want to know how they want to feel after you solve that particular pain. So you can just kind of paint that beautiful landscape of, what happens once they're no longer stuck in this horrible, I want to get out of the situation place, and have moved to using a solution that actually works, that helps them do the job that they want to do without the stress. Okay, so that's all great, but how do you actually figure any of this out? So you start with customer surveys, and there's a bunch of different and great ways to do customer surveys. I'm just going to show you one of the ways that we do them. And so a really great way to do a survey is to think about your segments. And so that's partly going to depend on how big the company you're running the survey for is, right? The bigger the company, the more specific you're going to want to get with your segment. The smaller the company, usually you can afford to go a little broader. But just generally speaking, you want to choose the best fit customer segment for the problem you're trying to solve right now. This is usually going to be active customers who like your product. So a segment could be customers who signed up between, let's say, 3 and 12 months ago, are actively logging in, using your product, and generally giving you positive feedback. The actual kind of tail end of this, 12-month part, is going to depend on what your product is and how people tend to use them. So you can go longer, you can go shorter. Generally, 3 months is a good starter time because it's given people the chance to get to kind of know your tool and really dig in. And so you're not going to accidentally trigger any buyer's remorse. But generally, segment it around ending up speaking to your best customers, your best fit prospects. And so after you've kind of figured out that segment, you send out a customer survey that helps you understand how your best customers think and talk about the product. And so there's a lot of different ways you can ask questions. The way I tend to choose is kind of really dig into feelings. And that can feel a little basic at first, but it does help you dig past a lot of the things that people think they believe about choosing a product. So questions like, how would you describe your product name to a friend or colleague in the same field as you, gets people thinking about, you get that conversational idea of how they would essentially talk to a colleague, because the way we talk to colleagues is a lot closer to the way we would actually connect with when we see those words on your site versus, the way we would necessarily talk to a manager. What made you and your team start using product X? What problem was it helping you solve? This is, again, a very, very simple question, but it helps you kind of figure out, I apologize for my cats meowing in the background, but it helps you figure out essentially what that initial trigger was. And it gives you a really good bouncing off point for digging further into customer interviews. But I'm going to get to that in a little bit. Essentially, I kind of had to leave you with a couple of things about surveys is keep them simple and focus the language around figuring out how the customer really feels about the product versus anything else. It's try to skip kind of past the questions where people will try to present the best version of themselves, because that doesn't really give you that much useful information. And of course, if you want more info, we have a bunch of articles on the website that go through this in a lot more detail. Okay, so you've sent your customer survey. We use Typeform, which is just really nice, but you can use any form software that you just like the UX of. And we usually send them via email as well. But now going into visitor surveys. So visitor surveys are great for kind of telling you what the traffic on your website is doing. And they're really great when you pair them with your analytics data, whether that's from GA or from another source, because they kind of put a voice into the behavior you're going to be observing in analytics and then in heat mapping tools and stuff like that. So to run a really great visitor survey, first, you need to select the key pages in your site where you want to run the survey. And that's just, again, going to depend on your goals. So you can just run a survey on the homepage if that's where most of your conversions happen or where most of your buyer journey kind of goes from. You can do it on your highest traffic pages, and that's probably the homepage, but maybe also a few others, just depending on your business strategy. You can do it on set product or landing pages. You can even do it in your sign-up flow. So it really does depend on the goal. So the number one thing really is to be really, really clear about what you're trying to find. And then with visitor surveys, I find 3 questions are kind of the golden number, with your first question should always be the one that you're most interested in, because people kind of drop off visitor surveys a lot more than they would in any other type of surveys. Like in customer surveys, most people tend to finish them. Visitor surveys, because it's popping through the bottom of the site and you're doing other stuff and you're not really into answering surveys that much, you find that a lot of people fill out your first question and then casually ignore some of the rest. So always lead with the number one thing you're trying to find, and then have the other questions as kind of good supporting questions that just act as a great bonus. And we usually run this through something like Hotjar or Lucky Orange. And you can use any survey tool that lets you run a survey on your site. And so some of the questions that we usually use for question 1 is essentially trying to figure out what best describes them. Because at this point, you're trying to just build a better understanding of who your traffic actually is, like who did they say they are? And then you're matching that against the behavior. And then for follow-up questions, those are great, like just trying to figure out what they're there to do. So, hey, what best describes you? And then, hey, what are you currently using to do this task that you're here for us for? Like, what are you currently using to solve that pain? And that gives you kind of that idea of who those people are. And then we'll get into how to use that in a little bit. But, so you've done your customer surveys, you've done your visitor surveys, and you now have your data kind of sitting. You haven't really analyzed anything yet. And at that point, we usually run customer interviews. And so these are usually kind of 30 to 45-minute interviews. They can go up to 60 depending on how complex the product is. I think just start with a time you're feeling comfortable with first, because the most important thing is to get started. And so if you're not sure, start with 30 minutes. You can always make them longer later on. And so for those, what we usually do is we dig through the survey answers, and then we see who gave us the most interesting answers. Like you look for the patterns, and then you're like, okay, so these customers pointed out these very, very curious stuff that we want to dig into. And so then we invite them to do an interview. And so during the interviews, we start digging into the pains they felt that made them seek out this particular solution. And so I tend to approach those in not that structured a manner, because I find that it just gives you better results. And so I'd start with an open question about the pains, and then I just start following the different threads that the person gives me, because it tends to open them up a little bit more into the reality of what actually happened. And sometimes they won't. Sometimes you just, it's something that you don't connect with, and that's okay. But most of the time, it does really open up the conversation. Then, especially if you're working in SaaS, it's great to ask about the switch. So you want to figure out, what they switch from, and that could be switching from nothing. But the nothing would usually be some kind of like paper amalgam, a mix of stuff. So you're figuring out what they switched from, how they switched, who the main decision makers were, how the switch decision gets made. Like how many people are involved? Is it a committee? Is it an individual? Like what are the emotions that are going into that? Are there checklists? Do people get together and make a checklist of all the features they want? Is it more organic? All these things gives you great insight into how the reality of the buyer's journey will work later on. Okay, then you also want to dig into how the team actually uses solutions as well. So we kind of, usually we have an idea of how people use our product, and that idea doesn't quite always line up with the reality of it. And so this is a great opportunity to just dig in and see if there's other things that we don't know about the customers are actually doing. Okay, and then finally, like dig into how they talk about your solution to colleagues. Again, it's that the way we necessarily, like we think and present isn't always the same way that we actually talk in a casual chat. And when you have that kind of casual chat insights, it just gives you such a better view into the actual pains that your customers have. And then the final kind of piece of this is you also want to do a little bit of social listening. And that's a slightly glamorous way to say you're basically going to dig through a bunch of Reddit threads, Twitter convos, Facebook posts, online reviews, or you're going to use an AI tool to do some of that too. And from that, you're just trying to pull patterns into how customers are using your product, how customers feel about using your product, both the really good things they're saying and all of the frustrations that they're facing as well. Kind of top pains that they mention, the favorite things, and any kind of comparisons and name droppings to competitors that they make. Because this gives you kind of that outside picture of how the outside world, outside of the people who are really invested into, doing an interview with you and doing a survey with you, how those other people feel. Okay, and so at this point, you're sitting on a bunch of data. So how does this actually help you, figure out what the right elements are in order to double conversions? Okay, so usually at that point, what I do, and this is a screenshot of just the template that we've built over the years and we use now. We pull all that information into a very simple to use kind of living messaging doc. And what this doc usually has is just, it has a blurb about what the research is, so that anybody reading it just instantly knows what you did. And by what I mean by that is we interviewed 10 customers and we surveyed 352 people. And then I spoke to X team members and I read this many reviews. And this is the goal that we have for this, which is why you're now reading this document. And then from there, the first thing that I would pull based on all that kind of data that you have is the reality of people using that product, which is why this is called, the X reality. So we kind of start going to, you want to figure out why people are using this in the first place, and you start off generic. So the first bit will be why people use the solution that you provide, like the general solution, not your specific product. And then from there, you kind of go, okay, so people use our solution because they want to do blah. So, but what about our best fit customers, right? Like, what do they use our solution for? And what makes them different from that more general segment? And so you start layering all of that information in, and you start pulling direct customer quotes. Like during your interview, somebody will have said something really, really cool. And you start pulling all of those threads into that document. And what you really want to end up with in the end is kind of an A to Z of messaging. So you want to figure out all those pains that we talked about, right? Those go into your kind of, whether that's pre-trial, pre-purchase, that would just depend on the product. Using pre-trial here because this template is for SaaS. But basically your pre-purchase, pre-trial, pre-free account messaging. So all of that is focused on like the needs that people have, the outcomes that they want, and those pains that you pulled out. And so you're just kind of puzzling them together. Like, hey, I have this pain, I have this outcome, and then you start connecting them. You do the same within in trial, post-purchase, or in freemium kind of messaging as well. So you start just breaking down for each different stage. The most important thing about this analysis, it should not be pretty. This document should be filled with comments and thoughts and ideas, and people should be chatting in the margins, because that's what makes it useful. One of the things I've learned over the years is that any presentation or doc that looks too great doesn't get touched, and then doesn't get used. And that's the last thing you want out of messaging, which is why this is usually a Google Doc that should be talked in. Okay, and so let's kind of show some of that theory that I just covered in action fairly quickly. So what you're seeing right now on my screen is the ICPs for that product I showed you earlier, if you remember, upright. And so we started going in, right? And initially, they talked about the product in a very feature-heavy way. And it was like, who is this for? Well, it was kind of for everyone, right? Because everyone has a back. Everyone technically wants better posture. I don't think you're going to meet anyone out there who's like, you know what? No, I enjoy having a non-supreme posture. Like, when you have a universal product like that, it can be very, very difficult to narrow down. It's the same with like something like a cup, right? I mean, ultimately, everybody needs a cup of some kind. Everybody drinks some kind of liquid. So how do we figure out who those best fit customers are? And so during those interviews, we actually started seeing patterns for 3 different kinds of pain. So there was the pain of people who wanted better posture, but I just kept forgetting to sit up straight while they were at work. Like one guy said, every time I start working, I start moving closer and closer to my computer until I realized that we're, like butting heads. And then I remember, but that takes so long. So you just get so caught up in your work, you just forget. And that's how the sedentary office worker, and I just noticed there was a typo there, so I'm sorry for that. That's how that persona came up. And then there was another very distinct pain from those office workers was people who just wanted to look great in photos. A lot of customers were like, yeah, I feel my posture's fine everywhere, but I look at myself in pictures and I just think, I don't want to look like that. I want to look great with my shoulders back. And when I look at those photos, I want to feel amazing. And I don't. So I need I need a solution for that. And so that was what the upright device solved for them. And then the third segment, with the third type of pain, they had back and neck and posture problems. And so they were coming at it from kind of a holistic health aspect of, I just want to feel better. I don't want my back to be sore anymore. And so kind of going from that one product, we ended up with these 3 very distinct types of pain. And so this is how we ended up applying it. We essentially kind of combined the threads of those different pains, and it's get the healthy posture you've always wanted with, and you know what, apparently I did not include that slide, but after that there was a follow-up that essentially said, hey, your poor posture is not your fault. And then we hit them with some of those pains that I just showed you. And then essentially showed them how that works. And I'm pretty sure the exact conversion increase is further on in the deck, so I will save that for the end. But it worked, to kind of spoiler alert my own presentation. Okay, so you've done the research, we've seen an example. What is the actual next step to increase conversions? And that one is fairly simple. It's auditing your site and basically figuring out, hey, I have this awesome product, I have this awesome site, I've just done a bunch of messaging research. Does this actually line up? Does it make sense? And so you can go through kind of questions like these. Is the messaging on my site about me, or is it about my prospects' needs and pains? Generally, as a kind of a rule of thumb, you always want to focus on the prospects' needs and pains. Am I describing the prospects' real challenges and obstacles, as I kind of saw in this research I just did? Can people immediately see why they should choose this solution versus the competition? Am I using words and descriptions the prospects actually relate to? Have I included relatable, reliable social proof? Basically, do I have logos? Do I have customer stories? Do I have specific stats or data points that people are really curious about? Social proof is a way to just help people see themselves on the page. And that's why it should be linked to their pains and needs kind of as much as possible. And finally, you want to ask yourself, like, Are the next steps clear when my prospect lands here? Do they know what they should do next? And so you're kind of taking that, just an audit through your site, your messaging report on one hand, a set of questions like these on the other, and you're trying to figure out if they line up. Okay, and then so you've done the research, you've done the audit. The final step is to add your customers' pains and needs in. And geez, this is my second typo that I will fix straight after this presentation. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so you need to help your customers see themselves. That is really the most kind of important thing I'd love you to walk away with. They need to see themselves in the copy. They need to see themselves in the design, in your nav menu. So that should really give them the experience they want and access to the pages that they really need to see. They should see themselves in the social proof, in the sign-up flow, and basically in absolutely every step. Okay, so here's an example of what happens when customers see themselves in the copy. So this is a company we worked with a while back on their homepage. And this is a decent homepage. Now it shows the product, it shows some social proof, it tells you that this is an easy to use project management software that you actually want to outgrow. And these are all pains that we did notice that ideal customer profiles, ICPs, coming to this page were looking for. But what we did find out is that it wasn't quite as deep. It wasn't quite as specific as it could be. So we ended up optimizing it to run your client work in the only platform that's actually built for it. Now, the beautiful thing about this particular product is that unlike most solutions available to our customers at the time, it was specifically made for client work. So anybody kind of coming to it for that was getting far, far more out of it than they would out of a generic tool. And so by focusing that, we saw a 7x increase in free trials. So a simple kind of copy change that helped people see themselves on the page led to that increase. Then there's the thing I just said about the menu, right? Nav is such an important part, especially if your product is complex. The more complex your product, the more important navigation becomes. So during that research we did, I've kind of figured out what the buyer journey was and how people researched this software before they signed up for free trial. We learned that competition and comparing to competitors was really important. We also kind of figured out what the most important pages were. And so what we did is we kind of took this menu that very much reflected what project management solution menus were at the time, to a slightly simplified version. They really just narrowed down on what people really needed to see in that buyer's journey. So they want to see the product. That was super important. So we led with the A to Z product tour. Comparing was super important. So we added that to kind of the top navigation menu. And we just saw those engagement metrics really go up with that. It created a much better experience. Okay, and then we also talked about how people need to see themselves in the design as well. Do you have, oh, yeah, cool, sorry, I was reading the comments. So, yeah, adding essentially your customers' emotions and needs to design is also really important. So back to Upright, that is kind of what we had initially. And then we kind of moved into more focused copy about things that people are actually experiencing. So that persona I mentioned, the sedentary office worker, we actually featured them on the homepage. And so that led to a 33.69 increase in transactions and a 25% increase in revenue. And here's that copy I mentioned, your poor posture isn't your fault, but there's something you can do about it. So by really pushing that messaging that we drew from the research, that pain-focused messaging, it made the site work even better than it did already. Okay, and so this kind of leaves me to my final bit, which is the key takeaway, and it is all about the messaging, essentially increasing conversions, increasing like SEO traffic. It is all about the messaging. I'm actually going to do one final tie-in because I didn't specifically talk about SEO here. And the truth of that is that SEO and conversions are very closely related. So whenever you're writing a page on a site, and that page needs to rank and that page needs to convert. So the two always have to go hand in hand. And so that research that we kind of talked about, putting together that messaging report, it also gives your SEO team and your SEO efforts a good starting point to kind of figure out what the best keywords are. Because by figuring out what the best pains are, you can start matching those with your keyword research. So ultimately, increasing conversions is all about the messaging, because the right messaging captures the key pains your customer is trying to solve. It reflects those pains on the page. It gives your SEO team the right customer problems to align the keyword strategy around. It helps all marketing work to increase sales and conversions, which is why every optimization you run has to start with that messaging research. And that's all. Thank you. Thank you so much. Are there any questions I can answer? You're on mute.
Thank you very much for reminding about the posture, keeping my back straight now. Thank you for this amazing performance and for insights about talking to customers. It's really great. I'm pretty sure that we all dream about finding the magic formula of perfect website optimization. It seems like it is it. Well, a few words again about Serpstat. I want to highlight that you can use Serpstat for practices that Sophia told us